Okay, in the last video we talked about the basics of population pyramids, right? The graphs. And at the very end we looked at these three basic shapes, right? The Christmas tree, where we said we have very few people up at the top, the older people, larger worker, middle economically active section, and a large number of children, right? We also looked at the box diagram where all sides are equal, and so you have the same amount up at the top, same in the middle, same at the bottom. And then the very last one, we looked at the cup, right? With a large number of old people or elderly or retired, then a good portion of workers, and then very few children at the bottom. So let's look at some real-life examples of these three, what it would look like. First, let's talk about some of the characteristics. What do they mean? Right? Where are you going to find a Christmas tree shape? Mostly in developing countries and developing nations. And what does that mean when you see this, right? It means that growth rates are generally slow. Why? You saw so many children being born. So why is this growth rate slow? The growth rate is slow is because those children are not surviving into adulthood, into old adulthood, right? Into elderly. So you have a short life expectancy, right? Many children are born, but they're also dying frequently early, right? You have an early death. High birth rate, we said, right? So where are you going to find a country that could be a Christmas tree shape? Many countries in Africa, some in Southeast Asia, right? Any of these countries in these areas might have one of these. High birth rate, but short life expectancy, maybe because of disease, conflict, something like that. So the growth rate is going to be slow. Where would you find the box shape? Well, the box tells you it's a developed country. It also gives you slow growth, population growth, right? Slow population growth. You have low infant mortality, right? And mortality means death. So not as many babies are being born probably. So you're not having as many babies born. But those babies, if they're being born, are living longer, have a greater chance of reaching old age. All right? So not as many being born, but they have a more likelihood of reaching a long life expectancy. Right? And we saw that, right? So if you were at the bottom, if you were born as a child, you would more likely grow up into be in the economically active section, and then also in the older, retired, elderly section. That was the box. Where might you find this, right? Places like United States or Canada, so the USA, many European nations. It's not spelled right, but there we go. European nations, right? So the U.S. or many European nations, right? The last one is the cup. Now this is, again, developed countries, developed nations, just like the box, but this is different. Instead of having slow growth, it's going to have negative growth, right? Why? Well, you have a low birth rate. There just are not as many babies being born, right? Also, that mortality might be low, so they're not dying, but there are just not that many babies being born. But you also have a long life expectancy, right? So this is where we saw a big portion of the population up at the top in the elderly, right? So what does that do? A low birth rate, long life expectancy, this gives you a shrinking population. Where might you see this? I believe if you do some research, you might find that Germany is one of these countries that has a cup figure. Also, Japan is famous for having this problem. So what's going to happen? Eventually, their population is going to shrink. They're going to have to find ways to deal with a smaller population, right? And we talked about the consequences of that. What might they have to do? All right, let's look at some specific countries. This country is Namibia. Right? Namibia is in Africa. Let's look at the graph, right? So again, here's the males, females. This one, the graph goes up to 95 plus instead of 80 plus. And it gives us a little bit more information. Urban and rural, right? So city, urban, and rural country population. So we can tell how many people live in the city, how many males and females live in the cities, and then how many of those males or females in the population live off in countryside, right? Farming maybe. So, does this fit the Christmas tree model, right? From 0 to 19-year-olds, right? A good portion of the population you can see is in the children, right? In this section. Again, in the economically active, the workers, you have quite a few, right? Because this is our longest period of life, our longest section of life. But as you get towards this, especially in the top right here, right, we're shrinking in as we go up. So less and less people are making it even to older ages of the workers, right? So at 64, 65, they might be dying. And then up all the way at the top, it shrinks even more. Very few people in the population are elderly, older, right? Both male and female, right? Both sides. So we have high birth rate, right? But low life expectancy, right? So even though we have a lot of these babies being born, as they grow up, they're dying because of disease, again, possibly bad health care or poor health care or conflict it could be. Let's look at a box. All right, so this represents Sweden's population. Again, males over on the left, females on the right. We go up to 85 plus. Down here, we don't know about these numbers, right? Even though it has a negative, this is still should just be positive populations. That doesn't mean there's -1 males or -2 males. But we could guess that it's in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, or something like that. Sweden's population is not huge, but so it's not going to be in the millions. But let's look, right? Here again, at the bottom, is our children. We've got our economically active here, and then our elderly. Again, the elderly are going to shrink in because eventually you die as you get older, but generally, right, the proportions of the population stay about the same as you go up. That's why it's called the box, okay? Let's look at the last section, the cup, right? And this is an example of Japan, right? So Japan, you see, has a large, a very long life expectancy, right? Up into 89 years old, you still have a good number of the people, right? But what's happening down here? Very few children are being born, right? Major part of your population is here in the workers, which is fine right now, right? This is the elderly. We'll just write old, and this is the kids, right? But here's the question. What's going to happen in the future? As this portion of the population, the workers, moves up into the older people, they're living longer, they have a longer life expectancy, so they can expect to reach in their 80 years old, many of them, right? But because you're having fewer children, right, this section, when it moves up, what's going to happen, right? Many fewer children to take the spots of workers. So you're going to see the working population, the bands will not extend as far out. They might only be out here, right? So what's that going to mean? You're going to have an older population with more people, and a working population to support the society is going to have less people, right? And we talked about what's going to happen. You're going to need to plan ahead for those old people, maybe some type of a pension like an MPF in Hong Kong, or raise taxes on workers, maybe extend the working life from 65 to 70, right? So that you're working longer and the government can take that extra money for taxes to support people. There could be many different consequences, right? So this is an explanation and some examples of what those different shapes mean. The Christmas tree, the box, and the cup.